All right, good afternoon, all. While those results are still coming in, and thank you, they are coming in, and right now it's looking like the preponderance of people have juvenile justice experience, which is why they are interested in being in the session today, so that does not surprise me. A couple of things. I just want to say we're pleased to be back for our afternoon session with a topic that's really personally very important to me, and also with two speakers who I really admire and love working with. Idaho is so lucky to have both of these people working in our juvenile justice system. So let me tell you who they are. Lael Hansen, who has focused her career in juvenile services in family and youth work, including being a probation officer, where she held a caseload in schools as part of her work and really enjoyed that, is now a division manager with Juvenile Services, which currently offers her the opportunity to work on a statewide team or on statewide teams and projects. And this gives Lael a really great view of what is happening across Idaho and Juvenile Services. So you will be the beneficiaries of that today with her involvement. I can attest to the value of Lael's voice as an advocate for youth and families from the many meetings that I have participated in with Lael, and she is just a pleasure to work with. And as I said, we're very lucky to have her. Alicia Baptiste was also a juvenile probation officer for 12 years here in Ada County, and she's currently a district liaison for the Idaho Department of Juvenile Corrections and focuses her work on prevention work. Alicia caught my attention really early in my time with Idaho Federation for her interest in youth and families and her very obvious appreciation of youth and parent voice. She's got great energy, which I actually find is very common among the several people I know here in Idaho who originally hail from Alaska. So like Alicia does, and there's just something about, I think there's just an adventurous spirit among Alaskans that seems to just live on even when they come out of Alaska. So delighted to have her with us today as well. During this presentation, if you have any questions of our speakers, please put them in the chat. Michelle Batten and I will be monitoring the chats and bringing in any of your questions to the speakers as they come across or as time permits. And let me tell you where we are in our poll before I hand it off. So, okay, yes, still the preponderance of people attending today have juvenile justice experience, most likely from a family perspective. And we have regions 3, 1, and 6 currently representative of the people who have answered that. So that's a nice cross section of our state. All right, with that, I will hand it off to Lael and Alicia, and I will go off screen, but we'll be right here to work with you on questions, etc.
Okay, hi, thank you, Ruth, and thank you everybody who's joined. We decided that we would sit in the room together, so hopefully this works for you all. In talking, we just felt like maybe this would be easier so that we're not talking on top of each other or not knowing when one of us is going to speak. So anyway, just kind of giving you a heads up on that. I guess since I'm talking, I will just start a little bit with more of who I am. As Ruth said, I did work as a juvenile probation officer for 12-ish years with Ada County. I've done after graduation of college, which I did in Northern California. I've lived here for all of my, I guess, adult life, my career. I've done everything here in Idaho, the Treasure Valley, and all focused on actually in the juvenile world, which I didn't think that's where my criminal justice degree would take me. I assumed I'd be working in the adult field, but I got into juvenile justice and just became really passionate about it, kind of understanding that it was maybe more where my focus should be because that's where our future is, right? So helping our youth. And you know, the youth system is much more rehabilitative versus kind of that more punitive or consequence-based or revolving door sort of work. And so I've stayed. I think it's really important work, and I've stayed. And now I'm a District 4 liaison with Department of Juvenile Corrections and have been for a little over 4 years, where probation might be more that kind of preventative, kind of reactive prevention, right? my role as a DL is much more preventative. You might not think Department of Juvenile Corrections to be on the prevention side because 90% of our folks are, working in the facilities and kind of doing that sort of work. But we do have a team of 16 that does the community prevention work. And so we're placed all around the state, one DL per region, and we are focused on working with our individual districts, our councils, our health coalitions, the commission that's statewide appointed through the governor, just on what's the need of our youth, which is going to look different in every district. But the DL role is really, and it's different in every district, obviously, because there's different things that we're focused on. But how can we be of help and support and be another person working, on the front line and helping make those changes? So I have a lot more to say, but I'm gonna turn it over to Lael, and then this is really, we're just kind of doing a question and answer. We don't have a formal presentation. We have a lot of things we want to put out there, but definitely want to take your questions first before we hit some of the other things we have in mind. Lael.
Thanks, Alicia. And thanks, Ruth, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. As Alicia said, she's hosting, so we could be in the same room together. And I appreciate that. I think for me, the important part, I've been doing juvenile justice for over 20 years, but what I'm excited about is I'm still learning. So either that means I'm a slow learner or we're open to change. And I'd like to think it's about change and that we're open to try new things. We do rely a lot on best practices and evidence-based in Ada County. But I just think the youth that we have the opportunity to serve deserve to work with people with an open mindset and a change mindset. So I will own, we haven't always done a great job in the past, but when we were doing it, it was with best intentions. And then as we learn better, hopefully we're doing better. I think what's important for me to say today is we know for years we operated in a frame of mind where we told parents what to do more than engaged or asked parents about their voice and what they could bring to the table. And I know across the state of Idaho right now, engaging families and bringing families to the table as partners is really important. But admittedly, sometimes it's not natural. And we go back into the directing how probation looks with families. So parent voice is a big piece of us being successful as we move down this path. But what we're also learning is, understandably, parent voice is different from time to time. And so I'm excited to hear from this group in terms of how we can do a better job listening to parents and engaging parents. And also knowing that a youth voice is an important part of the discussions and decisions that get made also. As Alicia said, probation's after the fact in the sense that the court has issued an order and things are somewhat set in place. But what I like to remember and work with my team on is how we get those things done can be best met when we are having the youth voice and parent voice in deciding that path. So I think we do have a couple questions already that we could tackle, and then we can talk about other topics as necessary.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm going to read a couple of questions that have come through. We actually have probably a good 5 questions or so that you can start with if you'd like. So first one is, can you address how parent voice impacts parole officer and or judge interaction with my youth?
So I can definitely speak to it at the community level, if you will. And so from a probation standpoint, we are engaged with the families as the court process is beginning. And I think where the parent voice is probably one of the first times the parent's voice is most impactful is during the social history interview. And that is with the parent, the youth, and a probation officer. And that's the opportunity to kind of understand who the youth is, where they're coming from, and what things we can maybe help support them in terms of probation and recommendations to the court. And so that interview is the beginning of the parent voice. I think ongoing communication is critical. And I think I think just one of our truths is sometimes parents feel they're not being heard because things aren't happening fast enough. And I can certainly appreciate that. At the same time, we're trying to figure out the right balance of having the youth pace their probation or the conditions they're going to be working on. And the truth is, by the time the parents come to meet with probation, the parent's been trying for years and years probably. And so certainly understand how it doesn't seem like maybe we're moving fast enough. As far as the court is concerned, it probably varies across the state, recognizing that there's that number of judges that are involved. In Ada County, we have juvenile judges that hear nothing but juvenile hearings, but I know across the state that's not always true. However, the social history and the sentencing report is a statewide practice. And I do know that the judges really rely on hearing from the parents and what the parent insight can give to the court for sentencing, for recommendations, and then also progress on how the youth's doing while on probation. So I think what parents can bring to the table is transparency. And I say that from a place that I'm sure seems somewhat vulnerable at times, but I think the better we understand each other, the quicker we can maybe get on the same page.
Thanks for that. I will say just a brief comment that I am the parent of a kid who was in the juvenile justice system for a while. And what I found also is my relationship with the judge in my son's case, even though the judge stayed pretty steady, but he tried a lot of different things at times. So he had a lot of different tactics, and sometimes he would seem like really rough on my kid or even me, or the two of us as parents. And then, you know, in the end, what I really got was this was a judge who really was trying to make good things happen in my son's life. And he was just sort of throwing a lot against the wall. So it taught me don't judge a book by its cover and stay in there in relationship with both the probation officers and the judges. And there was really a lot of good intention there that at first it was hard for me to see.
Ruth, I appreciate that. I think there is a lot of trial and error sometimes, right? And understanding parents have already been through that, I can appreciate where it might feel frustrating that, what, we're going to try this again or start over. But I also think recognizing that a youth changes so much during their development that, yeah, sometimes we have to try things 3 times before it works, but it might work that 3rd time. And so I think trying again and sticking with it, Ruth, is great advice.
So let me throw out another question, and then I want to encourage parents listening, please share not just your questions, but any comments in the chat, experiences that you think might be valuable for us to share with others. That would be great. So this question is, are parents involved in decision-making committees? So I'm just gonna let you hear that question and take it where you think it goes. And if it's not getting answered the way one would like, just give us a little more detail, but I have some thoughts on some different answers for that too.
I'm gonna take this first. So on decision-making committees, and so I'm not entirely certain if there's a specific committee that's in mind with this question, but I will say that yes, it is the intent, you know, of obviously of the department. So I'm statewide and layout specific to a local probation office, right? So it's maybe hard to speak on behalf of all 44 counties, but yes, overall, parents are highly encouraged to participate, and participation ranges from, you know, the first time that youth comes across the probation officers through the door at the probation office, right? Which may be before they're even sentenced, and there's really nothing, there's no decree, there's nothing like that. They're just coming in for that initial social history. Absolutely, parents, you know, we want that parent engagement, that parent voice, that feedback. You meet with that child one-on-one, and you get a lot of information. And yes, it is also important to have those conversations separate, because I think you have some youth who maybe aren't comfortable speaking in front of whoever the parent or guardian is, or may say things differently, or obviously may omit things, right? So then in that case, it's absolutely important to have that one-on-one with the parents, who at the same point may omit things if they're talking in front of their youth, right? So it goes both ways, but also having them, in the room together, which does happen as part of that social history process. So you get all of those times with each individual and as the group as a whole. But then there are other types of meetings. I mean, of course, you've got throughout probation, right? You'll have monthly meetings up to every week, just kind of depending on the youth, and having those meetings with family, youth, teachers, collaterals, because sometimes information is told differently to other parties. But also, if a youth is committed to Department of Juvenile Corrections, there are monthly staffings which occur to keep probation involved, because at that time, the internal DJC folks, if you want to think of it more as like a parole, kind of take that jurisdiction over. So probation doesn't have that jurisdiction anymore, but they stay involved because they will become that primary party once the youth comes out of Department of Juvenile Corrections. So keeping everybody involved and in the loop is so important. All the parties, I guess you're not officially a party to a case if I'm using that language, right? That's a court term, but all the individuals that mean something to that youth should be involved throughout the whole process. And we do put a lot of value on that. And I know maybe it doesn't seem like it sometimes, but I do want to say Department of Juvenile Corrections has really started looking at family engagement as a high priority. It's always been there, but kind of putting it, I don't know, at the top of the pedestal, if you want to say, bringing in new types of programs, for instance, and this doesn't seem new anymore, right, with COVID, but video conferencing, Zoom, right? We had brought in a different program prior to COVID as a way to get parents. I mean, we only have 3 facilities and they're spread throughout the state. And just because you live in Nampa doesn't mean your youth might be committed to Nampa, but also families move and they move out of state. And so keeping those families engaged, but also connected, whether it's through that monthly staffing or through, visits on a weekly basis or weekly family counseling or whatever it is. Or, my family just moved and now as a youth, I'm all out of sorts because I have no idea where I'm going to be released to. I have no connections to that community. I don't know how my little sister is doing or my dog, or I want to see my room or those sorts of things, right? So we got some software in place prior to COVID. That is obviously, as you can imagine, once COVID started, our use skyrocketed. We were averaging about 150 uses a month, and with COVID, it jumped up to about 777. That's an average. And so, because it's not just being used for monthly staffings, it is being used across the board to keep youth connected. They are in a facility for months, right, outside of their comforts, their support systems, everything they know. And so, in addition to that video conferencing stuff, we've put in place some family shuttles, trying to get parents who can't drive across the state, because for all sorts of reasons. I mean, heck, gas is expensive right now, right? So there's so many different reasons somebody might not be able to get from the east side to the west side, or south to north. And so there are some family shuttles that are going on a quarterly basis to keep those families connected, that face-to-face time, right? Sometimes that's great, you've got video conferencing, but I just want to see my mom, right? Or whatever the situation is. And so, we've put that up there. We've done virtual tours, which is really, I think, helpful in all areas. But when a youth maybe is put on a suspended commitment, and I know I'm probably going off, but so interrupt if you can.
You're good.
But, if a youth is placed on a suspended commitment because they're still spiraling downhill, and the judge is like, I'm putting you on suspended commitment, next issue, or next charge, you're getting committed. these virtual tours give families, we've got one for each of the 3 facilities, give families a look at what that is. I think you say commitment or you say IDJC, juvenile corrections, and the first thing that you think of is like a jail, right? I think that's natural. A cell, barbed wire, you know, that sort of thing. These videos give you a real look at what the facilities are, which is not that at all. It also talks about treatment. It shows you, you know, the outside rec area, the volleyball courts, and it's not meant, sometimes I do like to do this disclaimer that it's not meant to show you and to be like, oh, that looks like a great place to go, but it is meant to show you to see what it really is. And it is treatment, and it is, yes, you're in your room for those sleeping hours, you know, 8 hours a day. And sometimes youth need a place to go so they can go to their room if they need to just decompress or whatever that is, right? But that's not where folks are throughout the majority of the time that they are in custody. And there is treatment, there is work, there is fun because there's, you know, rec stuff. There are skills that they can learn. There's education, of course, and there's secondary education if they do complete their GED or their high school diploma while they're in custody. There's a lot going on. Bottom line is, I just wanted to say we really do value that parent voice, and, you know, try and encourage it as much as we can. And it's encouraged at every staffing, at every step along the way, from commitment to reintegration and, you know, everything in between and beforehand, which Lael can speak on. But so I wanted to get that out there. Definitely ask for, you know, clarifying questions if you have them.
Thanks, Alicia. In terms of decision making, so the committee, I'm not so sure what the question is coming from, but at a probation level and even with IDJC, we have staffings, we have screenings, and absolutely during those discussions, the parent does get to have their say on the decision making. You know, full transparency, the judge is going to be the final decision maker, so that the parent's voice is definitely taken into consideration, but it's not the final say. And I can imagine as a parent that could be frustrating at times. But we try very purposefully in Ada County, when we're having a staffing, to literally go around the table and let the youth speak to whatever the youth wants to in the discussion and the parent. And that information is shared with the court in a formal report. But I know at times it probably feels like it's outweighed by the judge's decision, and that is the truth sometimes. As Alicia spoke to, if it's a commitment, there's a more formal staffing for a DJC commitment, but parent voice and youth voice is also part of that decision making. And then even once the youth has been committed and goes through the assessment process, there are staffings that are looking into what type of treatment once in DJC custody the youth will be going to, and the parent contributes to that as well. Parent's not the only decision maker, but they're definitely at the table making some of those significant, contributing to those discussions that ultimately the judge will make the decision on. Does that speak to the decision-making committee?
And I can say that in my role as a sort of professional parent advocate, sit on committees that make some decisions or councils, and but also make a lot of suggestions regarding juvenile services. But I am on those committees with people who are not doing this professionally, but who are simply interested parents as well, and who bring a lot of voice to those committees, and juvenile voices come into those committees as well. I think the Department of Juvenile Corrections is really quite outstanding in seeking parent and youth input. Really, compared to a lot of our child serving systems, I would put the Department of Juvenile Corrections at the top in terms of really having embraced the idea of parent and youth voice. Okay, we do have another, this is a very interesting question. Is there an opportunity for an advocate to attend a youth's court interactions for youth who do not have parents who who will appear with them in front of the court, like similar to a CASA, which links advocates to children and family court. Is there anything outside of CASA? I mean, CASA certainly would be one way to be appointed a guardian.
That's a great question. And I can think of several cases I wish that that was also happening.
I bet.
We do see youth who either parents' rights have been terminated or parents aren't available. A lot goes into those different scenarios. And I do feel like the youth, although they have an attorney and they will have someone that's professionally there, a caseworker or someone that's professionally for them. The juvenile system, at least in Ada County, does not have that advocacy role. And right now I'm like spinning through like, how would we do that, or where would that come from? So I think that's a great question to ask, and definitely worth consideration. Because I know there are youth out there that just need that support with someone next to them that's not there professionally, not their attorney, but just someone by their side. And probation officer tries to do that, but we're there professionally. And I think sometimes boundaries don't extend ourselves to the way the youth just needs the support in those hearings. Hearings are also private depending on the age and the type of crime. There's some technicalities that go into it. And I know our system's great at technicalities. But I love the question. I love the idea. And I think probably through our public defender's office is probably the best place to start those conversations going. There are some organizations out there that are trying to work towards better representation for kids. And I think they could probably
Definitely
jump on that as well.
Yeah, it really brings up a great point, and I encourage people to keep looking at those possibilities and the connections and collaborations that could bring that about. Let me ask you this in relationship to that, though. I feel like I've seen the department advertise essentially for mentors who are willing to work with youth who are in the system. So not mentors who go to court with them, but simply a mentor relationship. Am I crazy, or is that out there, or is that something that sort of comes and goes depending on, I'm not sure what COVID would have done to the mentorship program, but can you speak to that?
There is a mentoring service, you know, in the community. So through some of the funds that DJC passes through to the counties, that can be paid. It falls under, we have both two pots, one under substance use and one under mental health. And so that does fund mentoring, which is, I mean, and I was going to add, you know, as far as an advocate for youth, does it have to be a formal advocate? I don't know, but I don't think so. I think, you know, if you have a relationship with a teacher or with, you know, granted the judge can say, you're not a party to the case, I'm not going to allow you in, but that doesn't mean, you know, a youth can't bring somebody who has been a support person to them, you know, in the community into court with them. If, you know, if that helps them, right? It comforts them, it brings them support, and maybe empowers them a little bit more to be maybe more vocal, and obviously in a respectful way. But I was going to say, so mentoring is a service, yes, that can be paid through, and might even be Medicaid also now, I'm not sure. But it is like, it's somebody who maybe doesn't have that professional role, where obviously if you tell your PO, I smoked pot yesterday, there's a requirement to report that, right, to the judge or however that works, right? Whereas this mentor person doesn't have that. They don't have that tie and that expectation. So, and it is somebody, I mean, of course, they're getting out 5 hours per week or whatever it is, but it's somebody who youth can call and say, I'm really struggling, you know, and sometimes, and they're all a little different, but some of the ones I've worked with, you know, they're like, I get calls at 2 in, and sometimes the youth just needs to talk. And sometimes, you know, it's suicidal ideations that we're working through, and, you know, it's all levels, but it is somebody that they do come to trust. And it is that they become that support person for many youth, and they are fabulous. I have just heard and seen and working with lots of cases, fabulous professional relationships, but connections that come from having access to those individuals. And they're not statewide, unfortunately. It is something that I know IDJC has on our radar, because I mean, not that we can make them, right? We can't just stand them up all over the state, but it's encouraged because I know District 4 has, I don't know if we're down to 3 now, 3 different mentoring providers, but they have been really, really phenomenal, at least in District 4, and a couple of the other districts do have access to those folks.
Thanks for that. When I've seen those advertised, they've been trying to attract new mentors, and it's always just looked like a really great program to me. All right, let's switch gears a minute. Here's an interesting question. So some parents might think that detention is actually the best place for their child, but that's not where their child necessarily goes or stays. And can you sort of speak to that? Like when a parent is just like at their wit's end and I don't know what to do. I think my child needs to be just kept somewhere safe because they don't seem to be safe with me. Can you just speak to those situations where detention is really not the appropriate answer in Idaho in that case?
I certainly can. Thanks for the question. And it's probably a conversation we're having daily in Ada County. So I understand it's 100% the truth. I think in my intro, I spoke to best practice and evidence-based, and that's really what's coaching and guiding us a lot in those conversations. Because what we have learned that exposure to detention, there are more harms to detention than there are benefits. And yet I understand that the immediate benefits are potentially there, but the long-term harms are what really are kind of causing us to have difference of opinions at times. But youth who have spent time in detention are less likely to graduate, more likely to make associates that are also within the juvenile justice system, pure exposure. And they're also, what we're seeing, and we're trying to replicate this study in Ada County with our data as well, is the more involved in this system, the longer the kid stays in the system and the more complicated their situation in the system becomes. And so that's where diversion, and as Alicia spoke to, DJC has really been supporting diversion efforts, because the outcomes for diversion have long-term successes far outweighing probation and/or detention. And so it does come from an evidence-based best practice approach. And it's, I don't know that we can say it's as simple as just pure association. But the flip side of it is there are youth in our community that do need to be in detention because they're a harm to the community. They are committing crimes that detention is the only place for them. And so if that's a population we're truly having in our detention centers, those lower risk kids that have struggles and are difficult at times are then going to commingle with the criminal kids, if you will. So there's Annie E. Casey has been involved in a juvenile detention alternative initiative for over 12 years. They have a lot of the research, a lot of the outcomes. And there are a lot of jurisdictions across the states that have zero detention population from that basis. The challenge is there needs to then be community options and community support. And that's where Idaho is at a big deficit, because when we say we don't think a youth should go to detention because of the harms of detention, but there's no other place in the community, then we're at a loss. And so those communities that have great community resources, they can make it to a zero detention population because they are able to do wraparound support services in their community. So even their higher risk kids can get enough intensity in the community that they can stay in the community. Successful education is one of the biggest indicators to adult success. And yet detention also directly interferes with education success. And so those are just some of the challenges we have in using detention. And quite honestly, I know in Ada County, when parents are hearing from a probation officer that detention is not appropriate, it's coming from that place. But in that moment, it doesn't feel like a very good solution because we also are lacking resources in our community at the same time.
And I have more to add to that, which is a great segue. So the governor, so the legislature appropriated, some of you guys might have heard this, but appropriated $11 million to, well, it's in Department of Juvenile Corrections budget, but it is to pass through, and it is for counties. So we basically oversee it, but for counties to stand up both assessment centers and youth crisis centers in the next year, right? So starting this July 1. So it's a very short amount of time, but it's exciting because as Lael said, and every county, every district is so different, right? We're very rural as a whole, we're very rural. And so access to resources, even if they're like service of some sort, right, is still hard. And so these assessment centers, which is what we're working on first, that solicitation is actually out and closes in 10 days. And then we'll have the crisis centers. A lot of folks probably are aware of the adult crisis centers that came through, what, 3 or 4 years ago, that came through the legislature. There's one in each district, so there are 7 of them. We now have the funds to help, get the youth version up and running. But those 2 things are going to help tremendously with resources. And I'm not the one applying for the grant, so I can't tell you, what some of the ideas are. But it's open to, it's not just one per district, it's whoever applies. And it's up to about roughly 4.5 to 5.5 million per type of center. And I kind of equate it like the assessment centers are kind of more on the front end. They're maybe your newer offenders, whereas a crisis center is a little more emergent and might be those folks who have been in the system for a while. That's a little bit how I differentiate it, because I know some folks have a hard time. What's the difference? And can they both be the same thing? But what they're going to do ideally would be law enforcement instead of, or teachers or parents or whomever, right? Wherever the incident occurs, instead of your immediate thought being, let's go to detention, right? We have access now to this assessment center. Let's go there. And then what the assessment center ideally would do would be sussing out the rest. So not everybody in the community has to think, oh my gosh, is this a case that needs to go to detention? Is this a case that maybe needs to go to, some other facility that has respite? Do they need, you don't need to figure all that out. You take them to the assessment center, who then works with the youth and the family to then take it the rest of the way, right? And so that frees up your teachers to get back to teaching, that frees up your law enforcement to get back onto the street, that frees up ideally like your hospitals or your ERs if it was for some reason a case that was going that direction. And now you just have to think of one place. That's the one place in your mind, right? You don't have to think of what are all my access to resources and what do I have in my county. And now you're working one-on-one with whoever's employed at that facility, that assessment, that center, and you're working with one person or a group of people that are housed in those 4 walls that now are like, okay, well, let's get you signed up with Medicaid, or there are so many ideas of what these can become, but the idea is to break down barriers for families and for children, for youth. And not, okay, well, now you've got to drive across the county to go get your ID. Now you've got to drive across the county to try and sign up for Medicaid. Now you need to drive across, and now the day's up. So tomorrow you could start again. It's to break all of that down and get everything under one roof. And some of it might even be as simple as, do you ever have breakfast together? Let's try and build those skills. Or, it doesn't have to be, high level kind of crisis stuff. It can kind of also be some simpler things that maybe just don't get done because for whatever reason, there's not enough time or it's just not thought about. So diverting from detention, because detention, you know, it's there for a reason. It's there for some of those tougher cases when there's nothing for them or you need community protection. But for those first time folks coming through the system or those lower risk offenders, what it does is it's more harmful in the end. It can be more harmful in the end. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That really resonates with me, what you all are talking about and the harm that comes. And I think this is one of the things that I really admire in juvenile corrections is that this is a group who's really trying to be mindful of who they're working with. And are they working with a kid who's creating trouble mostly in their own life for reasons that really have nothing to do with any sort of criminal intent or element? Because that's not what the juvenile corrections system was designed for. And if those kids, and I've known quite a few of those types of kids who are really just creating a lot of trouble in their own life and they're oppositional, they're not hurting anybody else. If they end up in those systems weren't built for them. And I think unintentionally, they do become really difficult and traumatizing to those kids. I've had kids speak to me about how they understand why they ended up there because they were being so oppositional, but actually it has had that harm in their life. They wish they could undo that piece. So, and I get it as a parent, like I just need my child to be somewhere safe. So I sleep better at night knowing that he is in a detention center and safe. But that's not actually the best thing for my child. And so I really appreciate the expertise that says we know who we're designed for. And that's who we want to have in our programs. And we want to help other people get to the right types of places. And these assessment centers, we're super excited about them at Idaho Federation because they really will offer us places in the community where teens can be looked at in a better and more wholesome way for what are their true needs, where should they be going, and what do they need. So kudos to all the work that's happening there for sure. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left. I do have a couple of sort of global questions, and you've some of your answers are sort of in partial answers to some of these questions, but I'll read one and then two, and then let you guys sort of speak to anything else you would like to share with parents today. And parents, let me just put you on notice that this would be a good time to get in any final questions so that we can get them into the queue. All right, so in what ways can families advocate for their child once their child is involved in the juvenile justice system? So that's a pretty global question, but is there anything there you'd kind of like to speak to that would be helpful to families?
There is one thing I would like to say. I really think family voice, once the youth is in the system, the family's voice can really highlight strengths. And I can speak to just when I was a PO. So at Ada County, we were, strength-based focus was important, and in writing, in assessing a youth and doing what we call the WILSI, it's an assessment that throughout the state, every youth coming through the system gets an assessment. It's a risk assessment to show you kind of how at risk a youth is. All 8 sections, you would address, what's a strength in that area, right? And so there's that, and strength I know is kind of on the minds of the probation officer, but again, like I said, you're also responding to sometimes a youth who's still continuing to struggle or reoffend or really not doing well in any of the 8 areas, right? And so sometimes it's hard to keep strengths on the top of your mind. As hard as you try, right? Sometimes you get stuck, or even you go into court and it's like, wow, that whole court hearing was negative, or whatever is going on. Parents or any support people for the youth can really kind of bring that back to the forefront, right? And even as simple as, well, you know, but they haven't used marijuana in the last week and they were a multiple times a day user, or what, like that's a strength, right? There are so many different strengths, but we don't always pick those out because we're focused on sometimes just like the chaotic, trying to help the youth remedy whatever the situation is, and not always bringing, oh yeah, you did go to school every day last week, you know, some of those things. Like strengths can be of all levels, right? And so I really think being there and reminding the team, or just, you know, suggesting some of those things, what's going well, changes that have been made, you know, in the youth's time that they've been supervised by a PO, you know, so a lot of those changes that they've made, and maybe things that have stuck and become now of value, or changes within the family that sometimes are missed, you know. So I think that is huge, and I definitely think there's always room for that.
I think just real quickly to piggyback on the strengths aspect, in Ada County, we're really digging in and focusing on graduated responses. And within the graduated responses, we're looking at both paths. Evidence tells us that incentives work as well as sanctions. And yet for years, our system has been just about sanctions. And so we are trying to balance and find those wins, because what we're learning is when we say kudos for 5 days at school, we get 5 more days at school. But when we were doing sanctions for school, we were disrupting school and kids weren't even getting back into school. So that's kind of a little peek into what we are starting to see, but we are definitely trying to look at the youth in the totality. And we ask parents to bring the strengths or bring the incentives, and let's celebrate the small wins, because what we know is those are going to get us to the bigger wins. We're also following a practice through Oregon Social Learning Center that was used in hospital care. And we're asking parents to give input on what they want to work on first. And I think the same thing is, what can we get a win out of the group so that then maybe we can tackle the harder thing next, right? So sometimes we get ambitious as probation officers and we put 5 things on the kid's plate. Parents exhausted, kids exhausted, no one's winning. And so we're trying to take a more purposeful, intentional path and finding successes, but having the parent tell us where to begin, because the parent knows better than we do.
Nice, thanks for sharing that. That's really good to hear. All right, a final, again, fairly global question. Take it where you will, and then just add anything else you would like to add. We have 10 minutes if we want it, and we can wrap up a little early if we don't need it all. And here's the sort of final thing we'd like you to speak to. What opportunities are there for family engagement and family voice? And in part, this is about when a youth is actually in the system. But I'm going to say, because I know we have a variety of parents listening, also when a youth is no longer in the system, but a parent is interested in continuing to help, and maybe they never had a youth in the system, but this is an area they really care about. So just some general opportunities for parent engagement and voice in Idaho juvenile corrections.
Because I feel like I already spoke to when they're, you know, how does a parent's voice come to play when a youth is in the system? Ruth, kind of what you said, once they're out of the system, that kind of resonated with me. We have district councils in a council in each district around the state, and they all report to the commission, which is basically appointed through the governor's office, where every state has a juvenile justice commission. And so we have one, and each of the 7 counties or districts has a council. And I would encourage, if there are, you know, folks here today or youth in the community, what do we go down to? As young as maybe 14, now I can't remember the youngest age. If you're interested in making a difference as far as juvenile justice goes in your district, absolutely reach out to me. Our DJC website under the district liaisons, all of us, there's 6 of us, one of us represents two districts, are all listed on there. we would love to have more parent voice and youth voice. All of the county's probation offices, they're all represented. And then we have like children's mental health or health and welfare to some degree. And then, various other parties that are on those councils. But there's always room for more. And we have, even at the commission level, if you want to, be involved at that like statewide level, there's that opportunity as well. So whatever kind of level you're interested, but really we have 3-year plans that we're working on, which are just now getting started for the next 3 years, which doesn't mean anything. Even having a new voice, and if there's, I know in District 4, ours are pretty broad. So those can be taken so many different directions. And I feel those should be driven a lot by the folks that are here today and less by me, right? And I'm not a member because I'm more support. But when I was a probation officer and I was a member, what was I doing? I didn't have that experience as a youth or a family member, and that's what we're trying to make a difference in. And so absolutely, there's that opportunity, and there's no cap, there's no limit on the number of people, but I can tell you probably the average, the councils range from about maybe 6 to 12 participating members in all districts. So it's not like they're gigantic. And they don't take up a ton of time. It's about 2-hour meeting a month, and then whatever time you want to give to those subcommittees, those focus areas. Thanks for putting my contact information up there. I saw that.
Yeah, and anybody can use IFF, and we will get you to Alicia or other contacts around the state for that work for sure. Any final thoughts?
I just want to say at the county level, the parent voice, even when you're tired, bring your voice into our meetings. And I say that with full understanding that sometimes you have to repeat things for us. Sometimes you have not had any sleep for days and weeks. But we are trying to listen better. And again, I'll admit, in the last 20 years, we haven't always been good listeners, but we know that parents are there for the right reason. And so bringing your voice, even if, I know it's a big ask, but even if it's a second or third time, please bring your voice. I think there's opportunities across the state through probation offices, and I'm Ada County, but if you're from a different county, I'm happy to connect you. We've talked in Ada County, we've talked about having a parent support group. So we talk about youth needing mentors. Sometimes parents need a mentor in the sense of someone by their side when they're going through the process. Having a parent be able to say how they got through probation with their youth could be really valuable. So I think there's a lot that can be offered through that. And even maybe those parents who don't have youth in the system, but can be someone when the parent is at their wit's end and probation says, we're going to give the kid another chance, and the kid's not being ideal, that parent needs someone. And I think there's those opportunities to maybe start building some support groups of sort, where it's just to get through the next hour or the next day, because I know parents come back and fight for their kid again, but they need someone to hear them for that hour when no one else is listening. So I would love to see us start to build some parent support for those times. Through the IGT, which is the Interagency Governance Team, there's a parent role and a parent voice. I sat on that team for years and years. I met some amazing parents, but I think there's opportunity for other parents to come and support those parents at that level as well. And Ruth can help with that contact also.
Yes, for sure. And really, I want to piggyback off that to say this is a really important part of the Federation's work, to make sure that you are not alone as a parent at any point. It, I think, can be easier to bring your voice when you feel shored up by other parents, and when you know that you are not alone in how you are thinking and feeling. And so that is part of what we like to do, connect parents so they are not alone on their journey. That is a support group we haven't had in the last couple of years. For instance, parents who have a youth in IDJC. We have support groups that would be related to that parents could participate in, for sure, but that might be a very specific support group that we could offer parents as there's interest. So make sure you reach out and let us know if there's interest. But mostly I want to echo, we do want you to bring your voice, and sometimes it really helps to have support in doing that, both to the mental health system as well as the juvenile justice system, to the education system. That's what this conference is all about, the different places and ways you can bring your voice. And that is, I'm happy to say, really the work of the Idaho Federation of Families. So please let us support you in bringing your voice to whatever areas of the system are important to you. We would love to do that. So I would just like to say thank you so much to both Lael and Alicia. I think that was a terrific session, and a lot of good questions were asked and answered. I think people probably have a sense of why I'm very enthusiastic about these two ladies and the work that they do. This right here is a reason that I feel good about the Department of Juvenile Corrections, because I know how hard they are trying to be a really good system that helps youth have a good childhood and a promising future. So that is greatly appreciated. I will take it from here. You gals, thank you again, and you can go off screen whenever you want. I'm just going to do a quick few housekeeping things, and then we will close our conference for today.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to everybody who participated.
Thanks for that. Okay, attendees, great session. Thanks for being with us. We will be on a break until tomorrow at 10 a.m. We have 3 sessions tomorrow, so we're starting a little earlier than we started today. In the meantime, I want to encourage you to keep connecting online on Whova, and we have some incentives for you to connect and keep conversations going among conference participants, because that's really just a great way to engage and get more out of this conference. And so we just want to reward people who are doing that. So I want to show you that we have, I guess I need to be able to see on my screen that I am showing you. Okay, this tote bag, it will be given to the top 10 connectors on the Whova app who are out there sharing thoughts, ideas, pictures, whatever. And we have 10 of those, and they're from our Mental Health Awareness Month campaign here in Idaho. So we'd love to share those with the top 10 connectors. And then I have a grand prize. It's very near and dear to my heart. And my staff laugh at me. But my staff also can't believe that I'm going to part with this delightful thing that has been in my life for a long time. And this is who it is. I want you to meet Tube Guy. Yeah, let's get the full effect of Tube Guy. Oh yeah, Tube Guy was facing the wrong way. Okay. Tube Guy makes a lot of noise. There are many benefits to owning Tube Guy. So he's going to the grand prize connector. Tube Guy comes with his own little home. Here it is. Tube Guy comes with his own little story. It is in this book. Tube Guy comes with suggested uses, such as babysitter, defender of your plants from any cats that you might have at home. Let's see, what else? Grandma sitter. Oh, yeah. Tube Guy makes a lot of white noise. I don't know if you could hear that when I had him on and in action, but that is like great nap time. Just put Tube Guy on and you'll go right to sleep, even at your office desk. So this sweet little guy has been in my life for the longest time, and I know you just can't even believe, I can't, that I'm going to part with him, but I am. I originally bought him for my husband and kids, thinking he would just be the most delightful little fun little gift. And sadly, as you know, we have a lot of attachment issues out there in the world today. They did not bond with Tube Guy, and it breaks my heart. because I feel like Michelle's over here just laughing at me. I'm super bonded with Tube Guy. But I love the work that we do and the fight that all of you are in and the greatness of you parents out there. And so I'm going to share Tube Guy with one of you because I know you will have a better home for Tube Guy than I have been able to. So once again, just really whet your appetite. He's the grand prize winner for all you connectors out there. Tube Guy coming your way. All right, you guys get out there, get connecting. Have a great evening, afternoon, and evening, and we will see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We really appreciate you being with us today. Take care.